So if you haven't heard of the meter adapter, it's one of the most impactful and breakthrough technologies in the home energy industry that I've ever seen. Now, it's referred to by a variety of names. You may have heard of it as a meter adapter. It's also known as a meter socket adapter. Meter connector is another common name. Certain manufacturers call it a backup switch or a meter collar. And this meter collar is this specific device that looks kind of like this. Now, what is this funny looking device and how does it work and what does it do? What is this funny looking device and how does it work and what does it do? Well, before we dive into the details of the meter adapter, I want to take a look with you at a main electrical panel and open up the main electrical panel. And what you're going to notice inside of this main electrical panel is that the meter itself lands on a socket with specific connections which allow the electrical current from the utility to pass through those connections and then be transferred to the bus bar, which has all the breakers and feeds the home. Notice everything is all in one here. The meter lands on a socket, which is part of one electrical component. This specific type of main electrical panel is called a combination panel. And the combination panel is very, very common and the primary type of panel you're going to find in the Western United States. Because of code and code adoption, this panel was primarily the one that was installed in most homes in California, Arizona, Oregon, while on the East Coast they have a different type of panel. This panel has the power coming in from the utility directly to the meter socket, which then passes through the meter, and it's all in one. Okay, now let's look at that other type of panel that you'll see more commonly on legacy homes on the East Coast. What it is it looks similar to a sub panel. It's basically a main electrical panel that has a main breaker on it, and it's separated from the socket which has the meter on it. In this case, the current from the grid comes into this meter socket, goes through the meter, and then gets fed through conduit, sometimes underground, sometimes overhead, but it's mostly underground, into a main panel that's located in the garage, on an outdoor post, sometimes in an interior closet. Regardless of the location, what you'll notice is the meter socket and the meter itself, which is owned by the utility, owned from a kind of liability, able to work on, able to touch. Technically, the utility actually pays for and owns the meter itself because that's their billing device and kind of measurement device to charge homeowners for energy that they use. That's separate from the homeowner's components. In this combination panel, everything is all in one. Okay, so the current feeds in here, and if you see the difference between these two, you can imagine in this scenario here, it's actually relatively easy to get between the electrical meter, which the utility owns, as I mentioned earlier, and the electrical equipment, which the homeowner owns. Okay, so we'll come back to this, but before we do, let's take again another look at the combination panel, right? If we look at the combination panel, what we're going to find is that the space between the meter socket and the bus bar, which the breakers land on, the homeowner side of the equipment, is actually very hard to get to. This is part of a kind of UL, which stands for Underwriter's Laboratory, full specification and kind of engineered product, which you really can't kind of field adapt. You can't take this apart in the field easily and make new connections and get between the meter and the electrical equipment. While in this design over here, this is all kind of field serviceable, field wireable. The wires between here can basically be cut, put into a new junction box, and connected to, routed to somewhere else. And this is the crux of how the meter collar makes such a big difference. If we can't get between here, right? If we can't find a spot, what the meter collar does is it sits behind the meter and creates a new point of connection or point of intercept between the power from the utility and the homeowner's electrical system. And so this meter collar makes an enormous difference for a variety of reasons, which we'll dive into a second, but now you understand kind of why and how this meter collar is installed. The meter is pulled, the collar goes on, and then the meter goes back, and it allows new functionality, which we're going to dive into now. So what is this functionality and what solutions does the meter collar actually address? And I use the word meter adapter, meter collar, meter connector kind of interchangeably throughout this video. So just, you can kind of refer to it all as that device I just showed you. So this meter adapter is primarily beneficial for 3 use cases. The first use case is if you're adding on more solar on those separate main panel meter sockets, you can do what's called a line side tap, which allows you to add additional solar that's not subject to some of the rules of the National Electric Code that require bus bar kind of backfeed limitations. And so when you can add a meter adapter behind the meter, you can actually tap in behind the meter and add more solar. It's a real big benefit without having to upgrade the main electrical panel. The second big one is that you can add more loads. There's new technologies now that allows you to increase additional loads through some designs I'll show you in a few minutes here. And why do people want to add more loads? Well, imagine you want to convert from a gasoline vehicle to an electric vehicle and charge your electric vehicle maybe from your own solar system, or just run it off electricity so you're not having to drive to the gas pumps every day. So there's benefit there, and rather than having to account for that electrical capacity on the existing main panel infrastructure, you now have an opportunity to kind of tap into the meter socket so that you can get access to additional power for those additional loads. And the third one's really, really cool, which is to provide seamless and instantaneous backup power. So backup power is a major benefit to people who are installing solar and storage systems. When the grid goes down, they can keep the lights on for their home. And to do that without a meter collar, it requires a lot of electrical wiring. I'll go into those details in a few minutes. But the third big application for this meter adapter is that it can provide seamless backup power, saving thousands of dollars. So in this case and in this case, this really allows you to, in many cases, avoid a main panel upgrade. And why do you want to avoid a main panel upgrade or avoid substantial electrical costs associated with installing backup power in a kind of traditional manner? Well, the benefits are really threefold to avoid a main panel upgrade, which are: 1, main panel upgrades cost a lot of money. They're expensive. They can cost thousands of dollars to start, and if you have to do things like trench to get new wires to the utility transformer, or if you have to move the electrical panel, or sometimes even the utility will require that you invest in a larger transformer to support your home or your community, those upgrades can be very costly, in the tens of thousands of dollars. Imagine trenching through long distance of concrete. So one is the expense. The second is how long they take. It actually is a pretty time-intensive process to go and request a main panel upgrade and figure out what you can do and what you can't do and coordinate with the utility. And the third, which people don't often think about, is with more and more people electrifying their home, if everybody starts upgrading their main electrical panels, there's a big impact to the utility grid. The utility grid has to account for that additional infrastructure. They have to kind of look at how many larger panels they have on each substation, their transformers, and if there's too many homes in a neighborhood that have been upgraded, they have to upgrade their transformer, they have to upgrade the substations, and this ends up costing, if you do the math for the whole country, trillions and trillions of dollars of infrastructure investment with new technologies that are not really necessary. So the grid impact, you say, oh, well, it's just kind of general grid impact. Well, who pays for that grid impact? Well, what happens is the grid impact is absorbed by the utilities having to make these over-investments in infrastructure, and those investments end up going right back down to the utility bill for each and every one of us, and increases utility bill costs. So when you can use innovative technologies to either avoid a main panel upgrade or save substantial costs on electrical rewiring to get something like backup power, has a substantial financial benefit to you, or for contractors, they can pass that financial benefit on to their homeowners in any market, providing more cost-effective solutions for people to electrify and add solar and storage. It's gonna help everyone. So let's dive into the first of these major applications that has this benefit, which is adding solar and storage with this meter collar. So if you look at a standard system design, we have our solar panels over here. They feed to an inverter system, and that inverter lands on a 40 amp breaker in this case. And that breaker is powered through the bus bar. And according to the National Electric Code, you can only really backfeed up to 120% of the bus bar minus the main breaker. So to say it straight, if you haven't got a lot of training on how you can backfeed electricity and how much you can backfeed, there is a substantial limitation. Now, there are new ways around that with new technologies like power control systems, but in general, backfeeding is only allowed at a certain level, at a certain threshold. And so when you can get a meter adapter that ties in behind the meter itself, you're now basically performing what's called a line side tap functionally, and you're able to backfeed more. Why? Because when you're backfeeding from the direction I just showed you a second ago, what's happening is power is coming into the bus bar from both directions. And when power is coming into the bus bar from both directions, functionally you have less control of how much energy is being used, because the main breaker alone isn't what's protecting the main bus bar. Maybe a little technical, but for people who can follow, it's super interesting actually. And so when you do a line side tap, power is again coming in from one source, one direction. And so you can actually feed more power into the system without concern of bus bar overload. So with a meter adapter, you can get more solar. Now, the first meter adapter that I had ever heard of was developed by SDG&E, which is a utility in Southern California. They called it the Renewable Meter Adapter, also known as the RMA, a really brilliant kind of leader in the industry, a guy named Ken Parks, introduced and invented this technology, as far as I know. And other utilities also developed their own version of this. SoCal Edison had a generation meter adapter called a GMA. PG&E has something called a green meter adapter. And even private companies like ConnectDER created their ConnectDER solar adapter. So these are all different versions of this meter collar that allow solar to tap in behind the meter and provide more power to the home without having to upgrade the main electrical panel. So one major benefit of the meter adapter. Let's take a look at the second major benefit, which is additional loads, additional demand, additional usage of power through something like electrification. And so again, if we have this meter here and we're looking to perform some electrification to convert existing fossil fuel-based appliances on site, or even our vehicles, for example, to electricity, and we now want to power more things from our home, what's going to happen is we're going to need to install more appliances, in this case an EV charger. And that EV charger has to land on the main electrical panel. We have to perform load calculations to make sure our existing electrical panel has sufficient power capacity to support those new loads. And in some cases we don't. That would trigger a main panel or main service upgrade. And upsizing that main service, again, could have those significant costs. So you go ahead and you want to charge your electric vehicle, and to do that effectively, you might have to upgrade. So if you install this meter adapter, now all of a sudden the meter adapter can directly power that electrical vehicle charger. And so that's one really simple application. You're now no longer having to use one of the breakers. You're no longer having to account for that in the same traditional way, because what's happening is you now have kind of two flows for electricity, one that's going to the main bus and another one that's going directly to this EV charger. And because it's before the main breaker even, you can effectively not have to account for the limit that the main bus bar had before. You can now basically have another highway for the electricity to travel. And the manufacturer that I know that currently has this available is, again, ConnectDER. They have something called ConnectDER EV. So you can look them up and find out more about this product. There's another technology that came out relatively recently. This video is being published in 2025, so I think it was released either earlier this year or later in 2024. And this is basically similar to an individual appliance, individual load that taps in. It's a sub panel. And in SPAN's case, a smart panel. SPAN's the manufacturer of the sub panel. They call it the SPAN Edge. It's an intelligent service point. It basically adds another sub panel without having to rewire anything inside of the existing electrical system, and just taps in behind the meter to provide additional power to a sub panel that can have smart breakers. So this is another benefit of kind of adding additional load supply. And this is not just one load, this could be multiple. This could be like, I don't know the exact number, I haven't done a deep research, but I know this technology, how it works is it basically has a tap that now feeds this sub panel and allows you to connect additional loads in addition to what was on your existing panel. So it's another application that's really, really interesting. Okay, so we talked about adding loads. Let's talk about the third one, which is also super exciting. It doesn't necessarily allow you to avoid a main panel upgrade, but it does allow you to avoid substantial electrical costs. So when we talk about keeping the lights on, if you think about a solar system that's feeding a main panel, what you'll notice is that the solar system, if the grid, for example, was to go down, turn off, a solar system in and of itself would also turn off. Now, why is that? Well, there's a law called the anti-islanding law, and this law or regulation is basically designed to protect a lineman, a utility worker in this scenario. Because imagine if someone goes out and tries to repair this electrical line and a home is back feeding energy to the electrical grid that's supposed to be off, kind of uncontrolled power. When the grid's on, the grid already has power on it, so it's not a big deal to have electricity flowing and connected. But when the grid's off, homes shouldn't be able to feed power back to the grid for the safety of people who are trying to repair those electrical lines. Okay, so the anti-islanding says that the inverter needs to see a source of voltage and a frequency from the grid, and the way they get that to provide backup is actually from a battery system. Typically the battery will simulate this, well, it's create this voltage, it'll create this frequency, and that will tell the inverter that it can turn on safely. But even with the battery, we need a point of separation so that if this system's operating, there's no safety risk to the grid itself. And so the way backup systems historically have been installed is with a central switch that can open. This is kind of like an automatic transfer switch. It's actually more accurately referred to as a microgrid interconnection device. And this opening in the switch is a way so that when the grid is down, this microgrid, this kind of grid with its little mini grid, right? You got solar, inverter, batteries, and the loads of a home and a electrical system here is separate from electrically the grid. So the grid can basically have a blackout and the system will operate because this switch is open, the connection is open. You can see it's kind of an electrical space here in my diagram. Okay, so we have this opening here, but if I go back one step, what do you notice? Well, you'll notice all of these breakers, which are actually attached to a ton of wires, which run to all the loads. I just give you one light as a single load. But if you take all these breakers out and put them in a sub panel to get this switch behind the electrical system so that it isolates this microgrid, your home itself, this one little click of the button on my slide here is about 4 to 6, sometimes even 8 hours of electrical labor. You got to pull out all the wires from the existing electrical panel. You got to make sure that when you pull out those wires, you don't strip them on the edges. Sometimes these are in very tight spaces. Then you have to install a new electrical panel and basically rewire the new electrical panel with all of the existing circuits. If you have to move the panel beyond a certain distance, sometimes you have to get special GFCI breakers based on code. It's a very time-intensive, cost-intensive process. And so all of this can be avoided by creating a microgrid with a meter adapter. And so the way that works is basically, again, you pull the meter, you install a meter adapter, and that adapter has a disconnect. I mentioned there's different types of adapters. One was a tap for solar, one was a tap for loads like an EV charger or a sub panel. This one would have a special disconnect. Some even have a disconnect and maybe even an input as well. But this one has this disconnect, this microgrid interconnection device, so when the grid goes down, when there's a blackout, again, everything's operating because the meter adapter will isolate this area, this side of the meter from everything downstream of the grid. And so it's a very, very elegant, cost-effective way to provide backup power, which provides additional value and benefit to customers when they're installing solar and storage. And I know a few manufacturers make a product like this. Tesla, I know Enphase has a product. New World, I've heard, has a product that's available. ConnectER, I've heard, is a product that's coming to market. By the time you watch this video, there may be more kind of versions of this technology or this innovation that are available in the marketplace. But overall, it's a very, very elegant, streamlined way of getting backup power and creating isolation from the utility meter. So again, the meter adapter is very, very useful for adding solar. It's very useful for electrifying your home and adding more capacity for additional loads. And for providing backup power, it creates a seamless installation process. So yeah, super excited to share this with you. I've been really, really passionate about this technology because I know it solves so many problems. One note is that you can't have all of these in multiple different devices. So you think about taking the meter and putting a collar on there, an adapter, and putting the meter back. You can't put one adapter, as far as I know, and then another adapter on top of that, and another adapter on top of that. It's not like you can't have 6 scoops of ice cream cone. You got to choose your path, right? If you're planning on getting backup power and you see that the way your electrical system's designed, having that meter collar as the way to get that isolation, you may want to focus on the MID, microgrid interconnection device version of that, or one of those that actually includes other aspects of these benefits, so that you're not putting on more solar and having to remove it and reconfigure things. You want to make sure you have an effective strategy from the beginning. So I've been passionate about this meter adapter for many, many years because it solves so many problems in so many unique ways. And this content on the meter adapter is actually part of a much larger curriculum I have on the subject of avoiding main panel upgrades. When people are looking to electrify their home, add solar and storage, one of the kind of automatic actions that often just happens because an electrician says, hey, this is what you typically do when you do this stuff, is to spend the money on upgrading the infrastructure. And with new technologies available, it's often unneeded. And so I've developed an end-to-end curriculum on avoiding main panel upgrades. I may link to a kind of a shorter intro video here. So if you see a little YouTube video link here, you can click on that if you want to go deeper on avoiding main panel upgrades. And there's going to be a whole end-to-end curriculum available as well. So look in the description below if you really want to see if you can just get a full training on this stuff. For homeowners, it can save thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're a home energy professional, this stuff kind of separates you from everybody else in the market, because having a holistic perspective on electrification and solar and storage really is a unique skill set that I've been developing and really excited to share from a holistic perspective. So if you love this video, I hope you got a ton of value out of it. I would love to see you subscribe to the channel. The more people that subscribe, the more encouraged I am to put out more content. So definitely click the subscribe button below, and I hope to see you in a future video.